All right, maybe we'll get started. So thank you for joining us on our press call today. So just a note that at this time, all of the participants are muted and this call is being recorded. So if you do have any objections, you can disconnect at this time. So my name is Camille. I'm the Public Relations and Communications Coordinator for the International Year of the Salmon. I'm the communications lead for the 2022 expedition. So I'm sure you've already heard in February, the International Year of the Salmon and the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission launched the 2022 Pan-Pacific Winter High Seas Expedition. So this is the largest Pan-Pacific expedition to study the winter ecology of salmon in the North Pacific Ocean. So this weekend, we'll be seeing the launch of 2 Canadian research vessels to complete the fleet for the 2022 expedition. On Saturday, research vessel, the Sir John Franklin, will be departing from Victoria. And on Sunday, fishing vessel, the Raw Spirit, will be departing from Port Alberni, and they'll be joining the US NOAA Bell M Shimada and the research vessel TINRO from Russia. So not much is known about the crucial marine phase of the salmon life cycle, and with climate change and abnormal events in the North Pacific Ocean exposing salmon to conditions outside their normal climate cycles, our scientists are trying to understand more about what happens to salmon when they come into the open ocean. So today I'm joined by Mark Saunders, the International Year of the Salmon Director, and 3 chief Canadian scientists. We have Dr. Richard Beamish, Dr. Jackie King, and Chris Neville, who will be answering your questions. So they will each be giving a short presentation. And at the end of the presentations, we will be opening the floor to questions from the press. So if you do have a question, we ask that you raise your hand, and then by order of the questions, we'll unmute you, we'll introduce you by name. And then once you've been introduced, if you could just state your name and affiliation, that would be great. Once you've asked your questions, we'll mute you again on our end and turn it over to the next question. So I'm going to turn it over here to Mark Saunders. So Mark spent his career working for the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans, where he headed up Salmon, Aquaculture, and Freshwater Ecology Division at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo. And he is our director here at the IYS for the North Pacific region. So Mark.
Great. Thank you very much, Camille. I'm really excited to be here today as these 2 vessels join the fray in into the North Pacific Ocean with the other 2 vessels that have already departed from the United States and from Russia. I think all of you here understand the importance of salmon to around the Pacific Rim, in particular to Canadians. And the last 20, 30 years have not been particularly kind to Pacific salmon. And we know that this is a lot of the issues that are affecting salmon are related to climate change and related to the marine period of their life cycle. There is a work has been done and built up over the last number of years in the coastal area, but the high seas have remained really poorly understood. And I'm pleased today that we've got one of our 3 scientists, Dr. Dick Beamish, is with us. And Dr. Beamish was really sort of the inspiration, the impetus behind making 2 previous expeditions happen. And in fact, the International Year of the Salmon happen. And by saying that we, in order to manage salmon, we really need to understand what's happening in this marine phase, and we need to get back out there. So after many years of planning and fundraising, dealing with pandemics and the pandemic, that I'm really excited that the day is here, that the Canadian ships are joining. This is really one of the biggest international efforts that has ever been assembled in the North Pacific Ocean, both from a salmon perspective, from ocean science perspective. There are 4 vessels, over 60 scientists in this particular expedition coming from 3 different countries. We've got all 5 countries that participate in the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission: Canada, the United States, Japan, Korea, and Russia, involved in the planning. The cost is around $10 million, and Canada has been a leader and on both providing the leadership, but also the resources to go to sea. They've provided through the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, BC SHRIF, the DFO, and the province of British Columbia provided over $3 million that assisted in getting vessels to sea, but also engaging nine academic projects that Dr. King can elaborate on that involve linking University of Victoria, University of British Columbia, and DFO researchers in the work, in this international work that's so important. We're going to hear, I'm pleased that we've got our scientists today, but you're going to hear a little bit more from them. But this is an opportunity to do something that, in addition, aside from the work that was done in 2019 and 2020, there have been decades without study in this open ocean environment. And the use of DNA to be able to link the fish that we catch out there to their home rivers gives us the opportunity to understand the condition, where they are, what's their distribution out there, and what are the conditions in the part of the ocean that they're affected by. And maybe the next slide, Aidan. This is our active live tracking website page that all of you can have access to during the course of it. You can see a green track line where the Shimada was. It's currently in Kodiak taking on doing a crew change with some new scientists, and the Russian vessel TINRO is in the western side of the North Pacific, held up by a cyclone in that area as it's attempting to get to the westernmost area of our grid. So at least these ships will be going out conducting at each of those dots that you see there. They'll be conducting research, fishing operations, as well as study of the full oceanography, the ocean science of those areas that they're at. So we can start coupling our understanding of the DNA, where we'll know which populations are caught out there and where they are, and start to make the connections to the conditions of the ocean and the feed, et cetera, that's out there. You can see on the right-hand side, the two ships, the Raw Spirit, the fishing vessel, and the Canadian ship, the Sir John Franklin, are in their home ports, and they'll be heading out over the next number of days. And the circles are the Raw Spirits where it will be fishing, and the red dots are where the Franklin will be fishing. So we're excited. This is just the beginning of what's going to be, I'm sure, incredibly interesting as we deal with ocean conditions in the winter. But just having this number of researchers out, we're incredibly excited. We also see this as the beginning. We're working on another project that this work will inform through the UN Decade of Ocean Science, and you'll hear more about that in the days to come. But I think it's time now to hear from our scientists, and I'll turn it back to you, Camille.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. Beamish. So Dr. Beamish has a long and very illustrious career with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and is the leading Canadian researcher on salmon ecology. And as Mark already mentioned, it is largely because of Dr. Beamish that the expedition was even thought of and brought to fruition. So Dick, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I assume that people can hear me. I retired from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans over 10 years ago, but have maintained an interest in Pacific salmon and what affects their abundance. Now, I don't know if people know this or not, but in British Columbia, we have seen in the last 3 years the lowest commercial catches in history. And that's without a scientific explanation. And at the same time, we're seeing historic high catches of salmon in Alaska and in Russia. So there are dynamics going on with respect to the abundances of Pacific salmon that scientifically we simply don't understand. And it's certainly my opinion, and I think my colleagues agree, that one of the best ways of getting the information that we need to see a bigger picture is to work together as international teams. I mean, there's adequate number of scientists, probably ample number of scientists within Pacific salmon producing countries. And if we could work together effectively as international teams, then I'm pretty sure that we get the information that we need to what I say to be effective stewards of Pacific salmon in a future of changing ocean ecosystems. And just very quickly, why are we in the Gulf of Alaska? Well, we're there because most of the salmon in British Columbia rear in the Gulf of Alaska or close to it. The Gulf of Alaska also has salmon from Japan, Russia, and United States. And why are we there in the winter? Well, one of the ideas that we're testing is that the abundance of salmon is mostly determined by the first ocean winter. And we are making measurements in the winter that help us test that interpretation. And then finally, why is it international? Well, I've already answered that. It's international because we have a number of scientists from salmon producing countries, and we have worked together effectively for decades. And it's time now that we work together as an international team. So those are my introductory remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Beamish. And so I'll turn it over to Jackie King now. So Dr. King is the program head of the Basin and Coastal Scale Interaction Program with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Jackie is also the chief scientist on the Sir John Franklin. So Jackie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm a little excited and a little bit anxious to be going to sea on Saturday. We'll be taking out the Sir John Franklin, which is one of DFO's new fisheries offshore research vessels. It is fully outfitted for fishing and oceanographic sampling, and I think highlights how science on the ocean is moving towards integrated surveys, which for me is the big bonus of this survey. It integrates across nations, so that full international collaboration, but it has a whole suite of fishing and oceanographic sampling. Canada has really had a leadership role in this expedition, and Dick has been, as we've already mentioned, the primary initiator for preliminary surveys in 2019 and 2020. But given climate change impacts on freshwater habitat, coastal areas, and the high seas habitat for salmon, and all the other species in the ocean, nothing short of an international effort is required. And that extends well beyond salmon. It extends to the oceanographic conditions that we'll encounter out there, and it extends to the bottom of the food web. So we'll be looking at the ocean conditions, we'll be measuring plankton, we'll be measuring the small fish and the larger fish that the salmon are preying on. One of the highlights for DFO, of course, is the 9 graduate student projects that the Franklin will be supporting. So we'll be out there with some graduate students from UBC and UVic, and we have a whole suite of projects that I think are moving ecologists of the future towards understanding Pacific salmon and the ocean in general. Some of the ones to highlight are a project by researchers and myself at UVic using specific gear to the Franklin. We'll be using a multiple open closing net system. It's the acronym is called MOCNUS, which I think just makes it super cool to begin with. But we'll be filling in the gap between the plankton that all the other vessels will be measuring and the trawl nets so the fish. We'll be capturing that stuff in between krill and small fish. So filling in that research gap, and we have a graduate student working on that. Another, of course, is the innovative project led by Christy Miller Saunders of DFO and her postdoc, Christoph Deeg. They'll be looking at environmental DNA. So they'll be measuring genetic tissue left behind by organisms in the water column and being able to perhaps tell us the presence of some creatures that we're actually not sampling. They'll also be able to look at loading on the gills of salmon to determine infectious agents. So there's a lot of exciting graduate projects happening. And of course, DFO is well involved. We'll at the same time have our 60+ year oceanographic monitoring program out. It's called Line P, and it heads out to the central Gulf of Alaska to Ocean Station Papa, which is an oceanographic mooring station. So we've aligned our oceanography, and we've been able to coordinate the oceanography of the other vessels to sample similarly to Line P. So we'll be able to link what we're measuring to DFO's historic and illustrious legacy data set. We'll be also deploying Argo floats. So DFO is involved with the international program. It's a series of profiling floats that go down to 2,000 meters. So that's great to have DFO sort of continue on its collaboration there. The other thing that I'm excited and proud to be a part of is the DFO coordination with the Pacific Salmon Foundation. So Chris Neville will speak shortly to her role as chief scientist on the raw spirit, but I think it's unique and definitely innovative for Canada and the Pacific Salmon Foundation to be out there at the same time as the Franklin is and deploying different gear. So looking at the different catchability between our research trawl net and their research gear. So I'm excited to be out there on the water, the same time as Chris Neville, radio back and forth to say, hey, I see you, do you see me? What'd you catch? So we'll be coordinating out there, weather permitting.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jackie. So yeah, last but not least, I'll turn it over to Chris Neville. So Chris is a research biologist and the head of the Salmon Marine Interactions Program in the Regional Ecosystem Effects on Fish and Fisheries section at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo. Chris was also on the 2019 expedition on the Professor Kaganowski, and she'll be the chief scientist on the fishing vessel Raw Spirit. So Chris.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm really excited to be again part of the Gulf of Alaska expedition. As Camille just mentioned, I was out there in 2019 on the Professor Kaganowski, and it was an experience, and it was a lot of fun. We learned so many new things that we didn't expect to see. I was also helped coordinate the 2020 expedition, and as I just mentioned, what we expected to see, we really didn't know when we headed out there. But what we found was new. It was not what we expected. We found Fraser River sockeye salmon all the way across to the Central Pacific. We found schools of coho salmon, so larger schools of coho salmon. We found that although we expected the pink and the sockeye salmon to be overlapping and competing with each other in the winters of 2019 and 2020, they were in different areas of the Gulf of Alaska. So all of this was new information, and it showed us that we really need to continue to do this, and we need to be out there again. So this year on the Raw Spirit, I have no idea once again what to expect, because we will not be using trawl nets. We are going to be using experimental Japanese gill nets and long lines. Now, this is gear that the Japanese have used for years in their research, and but we have never used it, and we've had to modify how we fish it off the Raw Spirit. We do not know what we're going to see yet, and so there's that trepidation or that uncertainty. Are we going to catch a few fish, many fish? We simply don't know, but it's going to allow us to do so many, to do so much going forward. So first of all, the catch will allow us, like Jackie said, to compare with the trawl catches, both the species composition, the distribution, and the age classes of salmon and other fish. We may see some fish that we're not encountering with the trawl nets. we're going to be able to compare historic information. So both with the gillnet work that the Japanese have done, and then going back to the longline work that was done in the 1960s, and how do our catches compare now to what we were seeing back in those time periods. Because the gillnets and the longlines don't rub the fish in the same way that the trawl net will does when you're catching salmon, it's also going to allow us to catch or to collect tissue samples, specifically scale samples, to test some of our hypotheses or ideas that Dick was just talking about earlier on the condition of the fish and that growth during that first winter and the feeding of those fish. And it will give us new information on schooling. So the trawl catches in 2019 and 2020 suggested that the coho salmon were in relatively large schools. And the gillnet, because it's extended over 2.5 kilometers, will allow us to look at that more completely. In addition to the work that we're doing with the gillnet and the trawl net, we will be doing eDNA work out there and plankton CTD casts for the oceanographic work as well. And we have an amazing team. Most of our team have volunteered or are coming from NGOs, universities, and industry. We are taking 2 commercial fishermen with us that are part of our science team who have lots of experience with longline and gillnet work as well. So we're looking forward to getting out there, and a little nervous about the fact that this vessel is smaller than the Professor Kagnovsky, but it'll be an adventure, and grateful to be part of this team.
Lovely, thank you, Chris. So I'll briefly turn it back to Mark here so that he can speak to our partnerships and how fundamental they've been in planning our expeditions.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Camille. Yeah, I build on comments that I think all 3 of our scientists noted. This kind of work is so essential, and it really, one country, one agency can't do this work. And so we've got, as I said, multiple countries, but also multiple partners, whether it's industry, private individuals, government agencies, and so this is the list of the key partners that contributed to the expedition. So it's a really key piece. I'm going to turn it over to Camille now, and then we'll open it up. But I also wanted to just highlight the fact that with Dr. King and Chris and Ms. Neville, we've got and on the U.S. vessel, the Shimada, Lori Whitecamp is one of the chief scientists there. So on 3 of the 4 ships, we have women as chief scientists, and I don't think that is lost on the world that how critical and important and exciting it is to have these women in running expeditions of this nature. So congratulations to all of them. Maybe Camille, if you can carry on, we'll talk about the social media and then open it up for the questions.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so last but not least, we have put a lot of effort into the communications piece for this expedition as well, working to make sure that all of our vessels have bandwidth when they're out in the open ocean, because we really want to engage audiences and show them what it's like to be on these research vessels and the science that's being done. There's so many moving parts and components to an expedition like this that I think we're not privy to as a lay audience. So we're doing our best to try and convey that through our website. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We do live updates almost every single day. We've got communications points of contacts on each of the vessels. They're sending us photos and videos, giving us stories of day-to-day life on the ship, but also letting us know how they're advancing with their science and all the different equipment and tools that they're using. So yeah, we invite everybody to try and follow along. It's a lot of fun. And once we have the Canadian vessels out there, it'll be neat to see kind of where all 4 vessels are at as they're sending us, their stories and their videos. So that's it for our presentation. So I will open it up to questions now. So again, just a reminder, if you do want to ask a question, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand, and then once you've raised your hand, I will unmute you and introduce you, and you can ask your question. So I'll open it up right now. No questions from the press? We'll maybe give it a minute. I do see we've got quite a few attendees, so if there are no questions, maybe we can close it, or maybe give another minute to see if anybody wants to ask.
Yeah, I'd give it a minute, Camille. Maybe while we're waiting to see if we get some further questions. Maybe Chris, you were out there in 2019. What's the sense of being part of a international team in doing this kind of work, and the relationships that you built over time with that?
I think that was probably one of the best parts of the 2019 expedition. Was we were working with scientists from Canada, the US, Russia, Japan, and Korea. Yes. And you know, the way we look at science, the passion for salmon and science around the Pacific, and seeing the work that was being done, and realizing that by working together, we're going to find those answers that much faster. Our salmon don't recognize the borders, so we aren't recognizing the borders by working together either. And you know, for an example, in 2020, the genetics showed that we had salmon in a catch from as far south as the Columbia River right through to Alaska, or to Russia, including Canadian fish. And Japanese fish were in that mix too, just not in that set. So, you know, this is a real mixing ground out there. It's important that we're working together. And I'm looking forward to the research that comes out of this year's work.
Thanks. Dick, you're one of the, been around at this game for a while, and I know working with you that you were one of the original people to be able to work with Russian scientists. How do you see the Russian science that they've been doing this kind of work for 30 years, and I guess I'm excited to see it, the scientists from Canada, United States, and others working side by side and learning from each other. What do you take away from how the relationship with our Russian colleagues is building, and what they bring to the table here?
One of the things that I don't think that we're aware of in North America is that Russia catches almost half of the Pacific salmon, and they have been a major researcher in terms of studying Pacific salmon. Now, they mostly fish pink salmon and chum salmon, which are slightly different emphasis than we have in North America. But I want to tell you very quickly that perhaps our most famous fisheries scientist was Dr. Bill Ricker, and our former vessel was named after him. And Ricker, in his early career, learned Russian because there was about 10 times more Russian scientists studying salmon than there was in North America. And so this was back into the 40s. And so we've always recognized that Russian scientists are major contributors to the overall understanding of what regulates salmon abundance. And that's part of the reason that we are working together as international teams, and part of the reason that you have the TINRO and the Professor Kaganowski out working as part of an international fleet of salmon vessels and salmon researchers. So we've always had, I think, a close relationship with Russian scientists, and over the years, we've become very good friends. It really is truly an international team of researchers. And this also extends to Japanese scientists too, and even a few Koreans. So yes, we've had a focus on working with Russian scientists, but it is a really good international team that we have right now.
Great. Thanks, Dick. Maybe Jackie, just one for you. In putting your team together, what's your sense with some of the younger coming scientists that are just coming up and getting exposed to all this? What's your sense of their interest or their excitement about it? Or what are they most pumped about?
Um, Well, when you're younger, maybe your sense of adventure is a lot higher. So I actually do have a graduate student who is out for the whole month. And I have to say, one of the heroes there, providing a continuance in the oceanography lab. The enthusiasm, of course, is overwhelming and infectious.
Nice. Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Camille. I don't know if you see any questions coming, but if there's none,
Well, Mark,
we'll yeah.
Mark, before you hang up, I just want to point out something that our expedition in 2019, 2020, and now in 2022, these are privately funded and privately organized. And we haven't mentioned Dr. Brian Riddle, but he and I have raised this money, and each one of the expeditions is a little over $1 million. And our donors range from large organizations such as a Canadian Fish Company down to there's a lady that catches sockeye in Bristol Bay. So we have dozens of donors that have been helping us for these three studies in 2019, 2020, and now 2022. And along with the governments, the Russian government has been really good, and so has the provincial government and DFO. And so it's all privately funded and organized, and we have a small staff that does it. All of the people that have participated in our 3 expeditions have volunteered to be on the ship, and all of the people that are on the ships have agreed that the data that they collect is publicly available.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Dick. No, appreciate that. So I'll turn it back to you, Camille.
Yeah, so I don't see any hands raised, so I'm just going to assume that the press is not going to be asking any more questions. So we just wanted to thank you for coming. I hope it was informative, and yeah, follow along on our website, our social media. The ships will be launching this weekend, so we wish you, a great trip and calm seas. And we want to thank everybody again for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Maybe